Good evening. I'm Pam Caruso with the League of Women Voters of Alabama, and welcome to day one of our Alabama Community Mapping Forum number 2. This forum is a collaboration of several Alabama organizations across the state, including the League of Women Voters, ACLU, Alabama Values Progress, Alabama Forward, Alabama Election Protection Network, TOPS, and the Legal Defense Fund. We are recording this forum tonight and live streaming to the League of Women Voters Alabama Facebook page. Also, we have the closed caption capability turned on. All you have to do is go to the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on Turn Subtitles. For those watching on Zoom also, please, you can ask questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We will answer questions at the end tonight. I hope you watched our first forum on October 13th, where we discussed fair maps from a legal viewpoint and also went over a fair maps checklist that we believe you can use to evaluate the fairness of maps that in Alabama. We also discussed several areas in Alabama that have been gerrymandered, and we will relook at those areas as we go through this process. Our goals tonight and the following evenings is to engage with these organizations and citizens to provide a united response to the maps that the Alabama legislature will pass. We want to evaluate the maps based on a fair maps checklist that we will again discuss tonight. As I mentioned, this is tonight's agenda. I am Pam Caruso, and then we will go over an overview tonight. We have some great folks to talk in our roundtable. And then we have the Fair Maps checklist, and Tish Gotel Fox from ACLU will talk about some of the legal implications. As I mentioned, we have scheduled 5 nights to cover this forum, and Kathy, if you bring up the charts on the schedule for the 5 nights. We realized as we were planning this forum that there is so much to cover, and we wanted to give an update on what is going on in the legislature as they go through this process. And so the schedule for the 5 nights is, let's see, can you go the next chart, please? Here we go. Tonight's October 28th, and we're going to review the legislature process, and then we're going to go over the Fair Maps checklist, and we have some other discussions planned. On November 1st, which is Monday, we're going to review the congressional maps, and we will again give a summary of the day's special session in the legislature. On November 2nd, Tuesday, we're going to focus on the state house maps and give a summary of the day's special sessions. And in November 2nd and 3rd, we will be pulling together evaluations from a host of people, citizens, and the crowd fellows to pull together our reviews of the house maps. And then November 3rd, we'll go over the state Senate maps. On the 4th, which is next Thursday, we will do a recap of what's going on, what happened, some of the issues that came out, and some of the issues that we see in the release and the release of the maps, and where we can go from there. All right, thank you, Kathy. We will be sharing videos and other communication media from the good work that Alabama Values Progress is providing to the community. And Kendra Majors with Alabama Values Progress will give a recap today of what went on during the legislature. And to start off, could we please show the first video?
We welcome you to Frame It, where we work to deliver facts, increase transparency, and demand accountability in Alabama's democratic processes. Frame It is brought to you by Alabama Values Progress, a communications hub dedicated to breaking the cycle of misinformation during the times where the truth is hard to find. On today's episode, we will discuss the redistricting special session and what's to be expected. I want to start by giving a background on why the special session is needed. Legislators must pass bills that create new maps for the congressional, state senate, state house, and state board of education districts. They need to do that sooner in order for these district lines to be in place ahead of May 2022 primary. Census data was delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic and was released in legacy format in August and in user-friendly format in September. Leading into this special session, for which Governor Kay Ivey set to start on August 28th, there are a few things that you need to know. It is anticipated to be about 10 to 12 legislative days. And here's other interesting and questionable information. The special session starts on a Thursday. If you've ever kept up with the legislature, you know that they typically don't work on Fridays, but that's not always the case for a special session. Also, the maps are only going to be available one day before the special session starts, though we have found out that they will be accessible online via the legislature's website. As we saw in the public hearings, this is more of the typical lack of transparency we have seen with the legislature. If you think about it, while it is definitely helpful that the maps will be online, it's also important to note that not everyone in Alabama has access to reliable internet connection. So that still prevents some Alabamians from easily accessing the maps just one day before the special session begins. Every decade, Alabama legislators come together to draw new district lines that give every vote in Alabama equal weight and all communities equal access to the decision-making processes that determine funding for schools, hospitals, and other essential services. Alabamians deserve transparency in this process. Our state has a history of using inequitably drawn maps to dilute the political power of minority communities. The state has been sued so many times for not following the rules. There is currently a lawsuit going on over current maps in which the plaintiffs are seeking 2 majority-minority districts and to keep Alabama counties whole. Transparency is paramount to ensure equitable maps are drawn this time around. It's super important that the lines be drawn to reflect what is truly Alabama, not the centuries-old version of Alabama where those in power act like only white folks matter. As we have seen in the 2020 census data, people of color are growing in number, meaning Alabama is becoming more and more diverse. That means that the state's representation should be far less than 80% white male. The 2020 census results showed us that Alabama is about 26% black, which means having 2 majority-minority districts would make Alabama's congressional representation more reflective of Alabama's true demographics. And as we all know, the special session kicked off this afternoon for redistricting. Both chambers will reconvene at 9 a.m. in the morning. Today's legislative session was simply a formality, and a few resolutions were passed, and it was rather uneventful as compared to Tuesday's reapportionment committee. Tuesday's committee meeting was incredibly emotional to watch. All 4 maps passed out of the committee despite objections and concerns from grassroots organizations and the 6 Black legislators on the committee. The meeting was full of contentious discussion among the Republican co-chairs and Democrats over accurate and fair representation for Alabama's minority population, the fact that many members of the committee did not even receive the maps until the day before or the day of the meeting, and other questions about whether the maps truly meet the Voting Rights Act. During the meeting, Senator Jim McClendon, who is one of the co-chairs, blamed the delay in the census data for the rush in needing to get the maps out. The census data was released later than expected due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As we've seen through this process, legislators' questions were met with pushback from leaders who even had some meltdowns. Representative England, who released the maps via social media on his personal pages, said he did not even receive the maps until Monday. He said he felt there should be a better process and that the committee was doing a disservice to the people of Alabama.
There was a bit of confusion, or perhaps a better word is questionable transparency, on whether or not a racial polarization study was conducted. England asked Representative Pringle, who is the other co-chair, if there had been a racial polarization study done on Congressional District 7. Pringle initially argued it had been done, but when he was pushed further, the truth came to light and a study had not even been conducted. Pringle tried to smooth it over by saying that the BVAP of the district was 54% and that the attorney had said no study was needed. Eventually, it was agreed upon that a study would be conducted and one would also be done on the map that Senator Bobby Singleton plans to introduce. There was a lot of back and forth, passive aggressiveness, and simply annoyance at being questioned. At one point, Pringle had a meltdown because he said he had to attend 28 public hearings and meet with others about the maps, which is part of his job of being co-chair. Since many of the legislators had only seen the maps within the day, Representative Laura Hull made a motion to delay the vote on the congressional map until the committee could have more time to study and consider the maps. Ultimately, Hull's motion was tabled in a motion by McClendon. Representative Barbara Boyd gave an emotional plea to the group to work fairly and collectively and to allow for herself and her colleagues to be heard fairly, which she noted didn't seem to be starting that way. She asked the leaders what they would do if the shoe was on the other foot, and she even said that only God Almighty can change hearts. There were so many more things that were disheartening, infuriating, and downright disrespectful. This is all the evidence Alabamians should need to work to make changes in the leadership of the state. When leaders treat their colleagues with an immense lack of respect, it's time for them to go. I was also disappointed at the number of Republicans and white folks who sat there and didn't fight for what is right. That's a whole other topic I plan to address on Frame It, because white folks have to stop being silent on all important issues. To wrap it up, the lack of transparency and the hatred for accountability among some of Alabama's top officials has been rampant during the process, and it's sure to continue to rear its head during the special session. It becomes more and more evident the importance of the work grassroots organizations are doing and the need for us to build an army of Alabamians who are ready to join us in fighting for a more inclusive and equitable Alabama. To check out more Frame It episodes where we work to bring you news to increase transparency and accountability, follow us on social media at Alabama Values Progress, and we've dropped the link in the chat to our channel where you can watch future and past episodes. We will update daily during the special session. Thanks, you guys.
Kendra, thank you so much. I really appreciate your insights on that. I've watched the first day of the session and it was very disheartening, and you really put it in, said some good things, articulated that well. Tonight, we are very pleased to have Kathy Jones, the president of the Alabama League of Women Voters, Evan Milligan, who is the executive director of Alabama Forward, and Tish Gotel-Fox, who is the legal director for ACLU Alabama, here tonight. Thank you guys so much to be with us on this roundtable. So I really wanted to see, you've seen that video and you heard what Kendra said, and I'm sure you guys watched those sessions and saw the discussed. So what are your thoughts on the Alabama redistricting process? I know that's a big question, but I think you guys can address it.
Thank you for this setting this up, because when we look at what's been going on since August, when the census data came in and people were pushing to get to these hearings, one of the things that was loud and clear is there were repeated requests for a nonpartisan redistricting committee, and the thing that was mentioned by the reapportionment committee's attorney several times was that this is an inherently political process that has to be done by the elected leaders. And one of the things, that was stated several times. And then when we were watching the session this week with the committee, it became apparent that not only had the Democrats not seen the maps, the complete maps before they walked in before Monday, but also the Republicans had not seen it either, including the committee chair made a comment at one point that they had not seen it until the day before the meeting, and that they had hired a lawyer, which I'm assuming was Dorman Walker, but that they mentioned that he basically created the map. They said several times that they drew the map. But yet they did not know what was in it. They couldn't explain questions. And so it just, at that point, you start realizing they really did have an outside party drawing the maps. And it is disheartening, because you realize it's not, when you're asking for a nonpartisan mapping, someone to come in that's not partisan, and then to be told that that's not possible because it's political process, but yet they handed it off right off the bat. So that was my impression right off the bat, and there was a lot of contention.
So they basically hired a contractor.
Yeah.
Well, Pam, what I envisioned for this process was that when the governor called the special session, that the reapportionment committee had been working all this time, really educating themselves about what goes into a redistricting map. And there are quite a few people on that reapportionment committee who have been through this process before. And so my thought and expectation was they would steep themselves in the material. They would learn what goes into appropriate and inappropriate mapping policies and procedures. They would follow the United States Constitution, the Alabama Constitution, and the Voting Rights Act. And this being their first time redistricting without having to go through pre-clearance with the Department of Justice, they were going to take this seriously as representatives of the people. What we had instead was a show in which the majority party hired an attorney for the committee. They had each representative individually come in and take a look at the map for their district and only their district. And the committee assured itself that the representative was happy with their district. And then they completed that process for themselves. It wasn't that we saw mapping so that the people could elect their representatives. It was the representatives signing off that they were fine with the people that they were going to be representing. And I imagine there may have been some back and forth for some folks who felt that they needed alterations so that they would get enough Black folks. And ultimately, that's what that hearing before the special session seemed to suggest. And the interesting thing is that the mapping process isn't just draw lines, check and make sure that you haven't screwed over people of color, call it a day. There are a lot of very challenging things that have to go into consideration when you're drawing maps. And it appears that the reapportionment committee did not inform itself of what those things were, didn't educate itself about why those things are important. And rather than taking this opportunity without pre-clearance to demonstrate that they take this seriously and that they were going to be professionals about it, they handed it to an unelected, unaccountable, political operative attorney who assured them that he had met the legal requirements, and he gave them no education about how he met those requirements. And the minority party on that committee, full of attorneys who at least know it's not as easy as it looks, were asking questions. And the pushback was not because of in my mind, evil hearts and evil minds. It was total lack of knowledge and total disinterest in doing better. And if you're going to hand it off to someone, shouldn't it be a nonpartisan committee rather than an individual who may or may not know all of the proper steps to take into consideration?
You know, I think that's a really good point. I was just, as you were talking, thinking of all the hard work I know you three here have been doing for months to get ready for this process. I know there's been lots of training for citizens and the community, and really appreciate it, because it's a complex problem. It really is hard to meet all the criteria in the requirements. Evan, did you want to add something to that discussion on
that? I thought I was surprised by how much they were willing to say on the record, you know, in front of a rolling camera and mics that were hot and live. I think that meeting probably, it went better than what I imagine they did in 1901, but it, you know, it's gonna be worse than what we'll get done in 2031 if we do what we need to do between now and then. So,
well, I noticed I will have a new representative in my area. My precinct has been going rather Democratic, though it's very white. It's gone Democratic, and so I have a new representative that picked that up, that area. So you know they've been playing some games. So what do you think will happen during this redistricting process? It's going to go on for what, 10 days, legislative days? So what do we think the process will look like? You want to take that first, Evan?
yeah, so I'm think, you know, barring some kind of mass Damascus Road type of experience in either side of the legislature, they'll get the maps through that were presented Tuesday or were voted out of the committee, unless there's some, you know, haggling from folks even among the dominant party that feel like their interests aren't represented by those maps. So we could certainly get something that's worse, but I think, you know, at a minimum, we'll get those maps. And then it's really up to the folks who are represented on this call and the people that have been doing this work to do education, to look at what we can do locally, because there's still many city councils, county commissions, and boards of education at the local level that need to be redistricted. And there are resources out there and available for citizens to really take what is going on here in Montgomery and use that as fuel for their work in their home communities. So that's one thing that happens when we move forward. And then in terms of the state, you know, there are legal challenges that people are going to be engaging to challenge violations of the Voting Rights Act. And those are things that we'll have to watch. I think we'll hear more of that tonight and over the course of these forums, as far as what certain theories are and what some of the approaches to that might be.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to add, one of the things that struck me tonight when I was watching them kick off is all they did was to go in to session and put a resolution in, so we're in session, send another one to the governor, and then they adjourned. In the Senate, the thing I saw was that Senator Orr was putting in COVID bills, and then there was another couple of people suggesting political bills. And so, you know, there's going to be things going on besides redistricting. And it sounded like they basically left in the Senate, they left it open until 5 o'clock for anybody that had a bill they wanted to put in to put it down. But there's nothing pre-filed yet. So you'll see that tomorrow. And what we've been hearing for the Senate and the House is that the two mapping bills that the reapportionment committee approved, they're going to send 2 of them to the House, 2 of them to the Senate. We're also hearing that possibly there's going to be some other bills introduced that are more of a whole county plan. That I'm not sure where it's going to end up, but tomorrow it ought to become pretty obvious where that's going to happen. One of the things during the reapportionment committee that Senator Smitherman picked up on, which I thought was pretty important and was dismissed by the committee chair, was the fact that, you know, they made the comment that they were working on a deadline, that the session had to start today, and they needed to get these maps out. But yet they said, well, you can ask your questions then. And Senator Smitherman mentioned, well, once we go onto the chamber floor, we cannot have our lawyer or the map maker come in and talk on the floor. And so that basically means that they're not going to get their questions answered there as well, which kind of tells you this is going to be, you know, really kind of a mess unless they do some of this out in the committee, which, you know, that could happen. One of the things that we're talking about, and that's going to be when you talk about the plans for the next several days, is this group who has been preparing, unlike some of the folks that were at that committee meeting this week, you know, we're looking at the maps from a more of an analytical approach, and we're going to make a list of where we're seeing issues and then write it down and send it to the legislature. So at least they'll have a list of where their problems are, and it'll be put into the record. And so that's going to be pretty powerful. It may not make a difference in the end with them passing it, but at least it'll be in the record that they know that they've got problems. And so that's the next few days.
Yeah, Tish, do you want to add anything to that? And also, if you have any questions, just put them in the Q&A box at the bottom. We'll answer questions at the end. Thank you.
I just wonder what the purpose was of the public hearings that went on all over the state. I know that in several of those hearings, there was very low attendance and there wasn't a lot of understanding about what needed to be discussed. But there were some that had a lot of back and forth, a lot of discussion, a lot of involvement. And people made very deep and striking points that they wanted taken into consideration. And I would really be interested in knowing how the hearings informed and influenced what was done on those maps. From the hearing that we saw on Tuesday, I never heard anything about how public concerns shaped, altered, or influenced what the map was going to look like that was being considered. I don't know whether we are going to have an opportunity to have testimony from folks who have very deep concerns about specific issues, Superfund sites, improving their municipal water, wastewater system. I understand that there are areas of the state that experienced terrible flooding last year as we were coming up on election day. I want to know how those concerns were addressed, or whether the process that we have in front of us will include taking testimony from organizations, from experts who have done this type of work before, just to ensure that the people are having an opportunity to be heard here. Clearly, if your representative is not in the majority party, you did not have any time to see the maps before ahead of time. You are not going to get an opportunity to ask any questions of whatever experts may have been used to draw up these maps. And in fact, I strongly suspect that you won't even be able to get a clear answer on whether any experts were relied upon or whether this was just something done with an attorney and a map maker.
Yeah, thank you. So what do you think now with these maps that are coming out are the implications for the election in 2022?
First, I think that with the slight changes that we see in some places on the maps, you can expect more of what you have always gotten. And if you are comfortable with that, please understand that that means that your representatives and legislature are focusing on hyper-partisan issues rather than the real questions and problems of the state of Alabama. You are not going to see serious discussion about how to stop rural hospitals from going under for lack of funding, lack of support. You're not going to hear about serious discussion of whether or not this state is prepared to expand Medicaid. You're not going to hear about how are we going to improve writing skills and math skills for elementary children across the state. What you are going to see is more legislation proposing to prohibit trans girls from playing in school athletics, even though we couldn't pass that bill before, and the ACLU struggled to find a client because it's not a problem. I think that people who are fine with the status quo are fine with how things are moving. But for people who are struggling, you just can't sit out this process. You just can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, or Kathy?
I was just going to say, following on what Tish was saying, the pandemic has really highlighted the fact that there are some just real systemic issues in our state with healthcare, education, environment, so many different issues, and it became pretty obvious last session that the legislators they're still not paying attention and trying to fix those problems. And so what we're seeing now is not going to change. It's not going to change. You're going to see a lot more bills that are put in place. There was one suggested today just to make a salutation that opposing President Biden's agenda. And it's like, this is not the people's business. They need to take care of Alabama and not try to find legislation where they can try to make a statement on a national stage. And right now this is not changing a thing. And one of the things I was going to say is one of the things in 2022 is going to be so important for people to know who their representatives and legislators are. And we need to get a lot better turnout because it is a mid-year election. And if we don't get the turnout, then some of these districts that are on the edge, they may not have enough people to turn out to make sure we tell people, get them to elect the people that they support, and they can support. If they like what they've got, then it'll stay the way it is. But people are going to have to turn out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think there's going into 2022 in terms of voter registration and voter turnout, there are people who, just like the folks that showed up to log in or in person show up at the public hearings and ultimately felt like they weren't heard, there are going to be many more people who feel shut out by the sort of extremist kind of campaigns we'll see in the primary season. Because as we have these hyper-partisan districts and these gerrymandered districts, or districts that are really written to or drawn in a way that dilute competition, dilute diversity of opinion, dilute diversity of race, you end up creating these districts where during primaries, the most partisan, most extreme person is running so that they can outshock and get more airtime than the other candidates, or get more national funding from whoever might be interested in that type of public policy outside of the state. And so you have people who are being elected into office on talking points and pledging these sort of passing litmus tests on these social issues that don't speak to the sewer and the roads and the economic vitality of those counties or those local towns, those local school districts. And there are people who are going to have interest in having their needs met. They know that burning all the Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw and critical race theory books is not putting more food on their table. That there will be people who are aware of that. And so how do we, as far as our coalition, connect with and turn out with Black, Indigenous, Latinx, AAPI voters here in the state, or potential voters who feel jaded and disconnected from that system, to inspire them to show up and to register, to become more engaged. I think that's a really interesting and unique opportunity for us. And then there are two books I wanted to share with the crowd today that, one is an article and one is a book. I just put it in the chat. Definitely encourage people to read about those or read that article, because it really places in a historical context what's happening now in this country in terms of the relationship between hyperpartisan gerrymandering and hyperpartisanship and the culture of hyperpartisanship. And the article by Michael Kang actually helps to place in context that what we're going through today is more similar to the majority of our country's history than it is dissimilar. We like to think of the 1950s, 1960s as being kind of the America, when actually it's been more like this. And so if we've lived through this and worse, then I think we have to draw on that, on those ancestors that we have to push through and to continue to have a different vision of the democracy that we want to build.
That's great. Hey, I really appreciate you guys. I think you had some really good words to say and added a lot to this conversation. Appreciate it very much. And so we will be doing this every night. This will be part of our time during these forums, is to have a little roundtable discussion. It'll be like this. We will talk about what happened that day, and then we will talk about some of the bigger issues that are out there. Thank you so much. Now Evan Milligan is going to talk about he developed a checklist for us that we presented on the October 13th, our first forum. And he is willing to go over that again, because we will be using this as we evaluate the maps that the legislatures have put out. Yeah, go ahead, Evan.
Okay, thank you, Pam. I think you have access to the checklist, but let me also put it in the chat just in case.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay, there we go. So on this list on the left-hand side, we have pretty much something that mirrors the legislative map checklist, which pretty much mirrors a congressional map checklist on the right. The difference between the two being that, the numbers of districts changes with respect to the body in question. So 35 districts in the Senate, no more than 105 or fewer than 67 in the House. Then in Congress, 7 districts. And, in terms of what you see here, this is a pretty bare bones minimum sort of list. It's not giving you a sense of how these principles should be balanced when they do come in conflict with one another. And that's something that happens. And those of you who've been making maps have wrestled with that. We wanted to list the principles here really just as a primer and as a reference point. I wanted to focus on the first two actually, and also to emphasize that these standards here were pretty much verbatim listed in the reapportionment committee guidelines that they relied upon, or that they said they would be relying upon for this year. So it's interesting when we go back and look at what happened Tuesday, what we'll see happen over the next 2 weeks, and see how, we don't necessarily see those legislators even living up to some of the things some of the own standards that they said they'd hold themselves to. But thinking about the first two, one thing that in reading those articles that I was sharing with y'all, I really wanted to highlight was how racial equity is really a driving principle that helped us even have these principles. So today, if you sit in a redistricting training, you hear about traditional principles of redistricting, compactness, contiguity, preserving communities of interest, one person, one vote, those things you see listed there. But if we actually look at the history of where they come from, for, a lot of this country's history, we didn't have those principles. It was really interesting for me to learn that, up until 1960, that was the Supreme Court's first time actually saying that the court had the authority to actually review cases involving reapportionment, and really doing that from the same window that it began to get engaged around segregation issues and just all of those civil rights cases from the 50s and the 60s. And so, race equity was a critical window, a critical component of that conversation that leads us to where we are today. Just to give you a sense of what I mean, prior to some of those landmark decisions in the 60s, say from Ohio, for example, between 1878 and 1892, the state legislatures could decide how they wanted to redistrict, if they wanted to redistrict. In Ohio, redistricted 7 times between 1878 and 1892, so that they had to build a new map every time the state legislature flipped. There were, in Alabama, for example, we hadn't redistricted since 1981, prior to the Reynolds decision in 1964. And there was that compromise that we all know very well between the Black Belt plantation owners and large landowners, North Alabama industrialists. The planters were allowed to hold control of the state government in exchange for the industrial leaders' support, provided that the state government delivered anti-union laws and low taxes. And that's still a dynamic, in our state today, but we've been redistricting, right? We're not still under that 1901 law. So why is that? Well, that's because the Supreme Court. That wasn't because the state legislature felt, we've had a change of heart. That it was literally litigation and having federal law supersede state law that brings us the one person, one vote doctrine. And the impact of that doctrine is really seismic on our political culture in this country, because of one person, one vote, we actually have political power shifting away from rural areas into more densely populated urban areas, because you have to have districts that have approximately equal or near equal population. So, if we fast forward from the 60s to today, we're back in this hyperpartisan era. Hyperpartisanship fuels gerrymandered maps, which fuels more hyperpartisanship. How do we get out of this? The stakes are high. January 6th insurrection. We've had politicization of public health data during the pandemic. What sort of government are we going to have during the next climate crisis, disease outbreak, white nationalist attack, other extremist attack? Who's going to be leading us in this hyperpartisan culture? And who's going to get us out of it? Are the courts going to intervene? Well, at Alabama Forward, I think it's important to really end on this note that we really want to make the message clear that we can't wait on courts to save us. We know we need courts. We know we need a federal, a functional system where federal law is respected. But we also need you and everyone who listens to you to really embrace an understanding of racial equity. Those doors that were open in the 50s and 60s have benefited all Americans. Not all Americans have benefited evenly, but collectively we have been able to take more advantage of our potential than we would have without those decisions and the policies that came out of that period of time. And if we were to lean further into that principle, we would find benefits that benefit all of us as Alabamians. When we embrace racial equity, our politics will become multipolar instead of bipolar. and that competition will require different people to speak to one another. The need to recognize and negotiate with difference rather than avoid or demonize difference will ultimately make us all smarter, more innovative, safer, and more transparent. And so the call is not to leave here dejected, not to leave the next 2 weeks. We have to move to Georgia or somewhere else because Alabama's a lost cause. The call is for us to think about, how do we demand racial equity? How do we build language and strategies that make sense to each of the communities who trust us right here in Alabama? We need to find a way of celebrating that equitable representation of Black, Latinx, AAPI, and Indigenous Alabamians presents a huge benefit to all Alabamians. And that resistance to that equitable representation threatens the health and safety and financial security of all Alabamians. And forums like this are one of the most important steps we can take in that direction. So hope you all will use this list as a resource. I just wanted to give you a little bit of insight into where some of these principles came from. Please look at the book and the article that I shared with you, and look forward to staying in touch with y'all. Thanks for allowing me to speak with you.
Hey, Evan, thanks so much. And as you said, these are really pretty basic, this checklist. And I noticed when Kendra was speaking, she was talking about some of the evaluations that they didn't appear to have even looked at. And,
right. And, there was this common refrain about not wanting to violate municipal boundaries, county boundaries, and how in really all of the maps that were presented, you see that happening several times to the advantage of, those who had the votes in the room. So, principles kind of going out of the window when it was convenient. That's definitely something that was dispiriting. But again, in order to be able to shift people's attention to something other than the hyperpartisanship that makes that possible, we'll have to help people understand how an alternative like racial equity and representation will benefit them, and can help connect with economic vitality and the other things that ultimately make our communities more livable and places that people will want to move to rather than move away from.
thank you so much, and really appreciate all the leadership you've been providing here. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Now we have Tish Gotel Fox, the legal director for ACLU Alabama, and she's going to give us some insights into the legal framework that we're in for how to evaluate the maps and what is going on. Thank you, Tish.
Thank you, Pam. When we were going through this process in our first panel, I discussed and explained that we have constitutional elements that we need to keep in mind. Evan mentioned, of course, the one person, one vote doctrine. We also have the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, adopted after the Civil War. And it has been interpreted and understood to require that as courts are evaluating redistricting, they have to keep in mind that redistricting, that they're looking for redistricting that provides minority voters with an equal opportunity to elect their preferred candidate, and that the 14th Amendment also prohibits states and local governments from drawing electoral lines with the intent or the effect of diluting minority voting strength. And really what Evan is highlighting for you when he talks about gerrymandering is the practice of diluting or overly packing districts and communities in such a way that Black voters have less political power than they would otherwise. And it's vitally important to understand that we live at a time and in a country in which it is impossible to be colorblind as you do anything. To say that you are doing something on a colorblind basis is to pretend that color has never mattered in this country. And if that is the pretend that you want to play, I suggest that you find a playground for it. On the election field, we know that in the state of Alabama, for a very long time, race was a critical consideration in whether you got to vote, where you got to vote, how you got to vote. And in fact, in a lot of ways, race is still coming up in the mix. In places in which you have large Black populations of voters, it's no accident that you may stand in line for 4 to 8 hours to wait to vote. It's no accident that you may not have the computers that you need to have a fully functional facility. It's no accident that you may have delays, that there aren't enough of this and there aren't enough of that. And the 14th Amendment in the Equal Protection Clause really takes into consideration the history of how we deal with race and how it has polluted our elections, and tells the person drawing the maps to be mindful. Looking at how you deal with race when you are redistricting, you don't just follow your intuition. You have experts who help in that process and procedure. Now, if I could have done math, I would have gone to med school instead of law school. But there are mathematical algorithms, there are statistical analyses, there are historic reviews of voter turnout and the effectiveness of a particular district as compared to if it were different. These mapping experts, effectiveness experts, these experts who help you understand historically what has happened in elections, those experts contribute data and information that helps construct these maps. And so the question has to be this: has our legislature consulted these kinds of experts as they've gone about this process and procedure? And if they consulted these experts, what did those experts find? As you were looking at maps, as you were looking at the maps that the Reapportionment Committee has adopted, as you were looking at maps that may be proposed from other parties before the legislature, the maps themselves, the pictures of the state of Alabama are beautiful. They are interesting. You can go on to a few websites, and I would ask that one of my partner organizations drop some of those try it for yourself mapping websites into the chat. And those are interesting. But the more critical things that you should be looking at are the data analytics that are underlying the maps. It's going to be a great big Excel sheet or a chart or something like that. There are going to be so many numbers, it's going to make your head spin. But here is what you should consider. Go to the districts that are of interest or concern for you, whether it's your own district, where your mom lives, where your grandma lives, where your job is, whatever. Go to that district. You will be informed about what the ideal population is for the redistricting. And there are different populations based on whether we're talking about state Senate, state House, congressional, or the Board of Education maps. Of course, when it comes to the congressional maps, we only have 7 districts. So the population target is pretty large there. you should be looking to see whether or not the populations in the districts at issue are roughly equivalent. They do not need to be exact in the calculation, but they should be plus or minus a certain percent depending on what type of map you are looking at. And I am going to say off the top of my head that it should be plus or minus 5%. And I am going to give the caveat that I could be wrong and it may be as much as plus or minus 10%. Again, it depends on what type of districting you're looking at. But the lower that deviation, the lower the difference between and among districts, the better. And if you are seeing numbers that are creeping up towards 9 or 10%, you should be asking, why is this population off by as much as it is? Second, you are going to want to look at what is the percentage of population that is Black. And you may be focused on Black voting age population, BVAP. And if you are looking at a map in which your BVAP is 80%, what does that tell you? A BVAP of 80% tells you that whoever is constructing this map has pushed a substantial number of Black voters into this district. The problem with that is that under the law, if the Black or minority voter could elect candidates of choice at a relatively low percentage rate, what is the purpose other than to keep all of those voters locked in one district together and avoid them impacting elections nearby? What is the purpose of having 80% BVAP when you could more evenly disperse the population of voters across a greater field of electoral possibility? So as you are looking at these maps, look at the BVAP and ask yourself, is this high? Under the VRA, a BVAP of 50% plus 1 is sufficient to constitute a majority minority district and likely will be considered constitutionally appropriate. I have developed the knee-jerk reaction that if I'm looking at a BVAP of 60%, something might be wrong. But if I'm looking at a BVAP of 80%, I know something's wrong. And as you're looking at these numbers, ask yourself, where are these lines falling? We've talked a lot about not splitting counties. Aside from the preference to not split counties, you don't want to split communities of interest. And you certainly shouldn't be splitting neighborhoods, college campuses, a block of similarly situated people. These types of things bring questions. And as you are looking at the maps for the areas that are of particular interest and concern for you, if you are seeing questionable stats, tell someone, call your legislator, pose the question, write an op-ed for your newspaper, because these are the questions that need to be addressed in this special session. And I strongly suspect they won't be. Thanks, Pam.
Hey, thank you, Tish. I really appreciate that. And I did want to point out that Dave's redistricting tool, which is a free tool, as Kathy was showing me today, the analytics are in there. You can pull up the maps that have been released by the legislature, and you can look at the analytics. Just push on the button and you can look at all the data. And a lot of what you're saying, it's right there in their maps, in the analytics. So, but thank you. Really appreciate that. Tonight, we also have Anisha Hardy with the Alabama Values and Rodricia Roussal with AEPN to talk about how Alabama citizens can get involved and make sure that their voices are heard. Thank you.
Yes. I think you're muted, Rodricia.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for that. My name is Redistricting. I am the Executive Director of the Ordinary People Society, formerly known as TOPS, and also the co-founder of Alabama Election Protection Network.
Hi, and I'm Anisha Hardy. I am the Executive Director of Alabama Values, and we're a state-based comms hub, communications hub, and we're pretty much dedicated to just raising awareness around Alabama's democratic processes by creating content and visual stories, and most importantly, amplifying the work of grassroots and civic organizations in Alabama. I just want to thank you all for joining us this evening. I hope that you found this information very engaging and informative. I know I have, and heard something that has ignited you to want to get involved with the process, with the redistricting process, if you haven't already, or just stay involved and spread the word.
Yes, we are excited. Alabamians, as you know, we have an opportunity at this time to determine our future and our state by getting involved in the redistricting process. This only occurs every decade, once a decade, every 10 years. So you may be asking why to get yourself involved. I mean, as previously stated, you've heard that your input is going to change the funding that schools receive, healthcare services, even affects the roads and the highways that you travel on every single day. Consequently, redistricting has a direct bearing on what matters to legislators and what they choose to tackle and which they choose to ignore. So hopefully some of the issues that you're going to be bringing forth, contacting your legislators, will be an issue that they can't ignore. Redistricting should be an issue that we all care about. This is something that we've been fighting on the front lines for the last year. So you must get involved. We're asking you to contact your legislators today.
Yeah, and there are several organizations that are on the ground working to keep, you, the public, informed about the redistricting process by providing resources such as redistricting educational toolkits, sharing content on social media, similar to the Frame It video that was shared by Alabama Values Progress, which is Alabama Values' sister organization, and also hosting community events such as this forum. So each night we will highlight a partner organization, resource, an initiative that, that's meant to help you stay involved and informed during the redistricting cycle and raise awareness, around other participatory activities such as voting. I mean, the fight doesn't stop, after redistricting. There are year-round issues and ways that we can address core issues impacting Alabamians. Now, Rodricia is going to share information regarding the work Alabama Election Protection Network is doing and the resources that they have available during this redistricting cycle.
So Alabama Election Protection Network is the network that was formed in 2019 to help eligible voters, especially those that are formerly incarcerated people, making sure that we're protecting the vote. We are a network of 3 that has become a resource hub for individuals to learn more how to participate in the redistricting process. We have found that we cannot allow these maps to move forward without fair representation from those that are living directly in the community and those that are directly impacted. So over the past several months, we have held a series of town hall meetings, community events, and even public hearings. But now is our time to really push the envelope. When legislators move forward with the maps, we are asking that fair, equitable maps that truly represent Alabama moves forward, and that's going to take you. As you can see here on the screen, Anisha has our website pulled up, which is you can go to voteprotection.org and you can click on our districts are Alabama. Once you get there, you'll see a series of different tools that you can actually scroll through. You can contact your legislator directly at the top and throughout the page. We have found that some have a reluctancy to submit letters because they're not sure exactly what to say. There's actually a generated letter that you can actually fill in. Just fill out your basic information. Very, very simple. On some of the other resources that we have, you can also get involved in some of our training sessions around redistricting. We offer a toolkit that was formed by AEPN to teach you about the redistricting process and also to teach others that you may be having community meetings with as well. So once again, this is some of our information that we have on our website. We are just here because this is our district, this is our Alabama, and we thank you for allowing us to talk about this on our platform. We hope that you contact your legislators today.
Yeah, and as Rodrisha mentioned, redistricting is an issue that we all should care about. It is connected to so many core community issues impacting us all: education, healthcare, voting rights, political representation, criminal justice reform. So we encourage you to stay involved in this process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Kathy, can you start my video, please? I really appreciate you. And I think that's a great message. And there's just not enough we can do to get people to get involved.
I agree.
All right, we do have 2 questions, and we're going to do them very quickly because we have spent longer than we expected here, but I think that's a good thing. One of them is from an anonymous attendee. 1/3 of this state is made up of minority residents, and we have 1 minority district consisting of representing the minority residents. And I'm assuming they mean this is from the congressional standpoint. Would somebody like to say anything about that? Because we do have 7 districts and only 1 minority district out of that. Tish, could you say anything about that? If Kathy will let you on.
I was sitting there thinking, I need to make sure I haven't banned everybody off of. Let's see.
Yeah.
Tish, can you come on? There she is.
Yeah. Tish, the question is on the, and I think you're muted. The question is on only 1 district with the minority district, I assume, in the Congress, the congressional. You have to unmute. Kathy may have muted you.
How? Let's see. Let's see. Well, let me see. Let me see if I've got.
Pam, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go right ahead.
You talking? Oh, I was just gonna throw in. I think while he's going, that in response to that question, there were actually several maps that were presented that demonstrated it's not only possible to have 2 majority minority districts in the state, it's possible to have 2 plurality minority districts in the state. It's possible to have a majority minority and plurality minority. And by plurality and minority, I mean less than 50%, but somewhere in the mid to upper 40s. So it's possible to have 2 districts one way or other, and getting those maps back on Tuesday, and seeing that the map that they actually brought back is the map that we have now, with even a lower amount of Black voting strength in District 7, and also all of the other districts. That the percentage of District 7 had dropped by about 6% from the previous map. So not only did they ignore guidance on how to build more than one of those districts, but actually took a step in the other direction with the current map.
Yeah, thank you. No, I don't know what's going on, Tish. Still can't hear.
I tried to ask her, prompt her to unmute, but I don't know why. Let's see.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. My computer just decides when I've said too much and it says shut up. And what can you do? So the question was concerning the potential for a second VRA district. Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, our analytics suggest that it may be legally required that the state of Alabama evaluate whether or not they are obligated to have a second majority minority district. I would say that we don't know for certain whether or not Alabama should have a second majority minority district, specifically because the state did not use the experts that one would typically anticipate. And so in that hearing on Tuesday, we heard the declaration from the committee chair, and it complies with Section 2 of the VRA. But he could not explain all of the elements for why it complies with Section 2 of the VRA. And in fact, it may not comply. I actually slightly disagree with Evan about District 7 and the reduction in BVAP. I think that District 7 could and should have a lower BVAP than what it did. However, I know for a fact that Jefferson County is right for potentially being a second majority minority district. It certainly has the population. It certainly has a high level of racial diversity in the region. The only way that it has not been a majority minority district until now is because it has been, Jefferson County has been sliced and diced and dealt to all of the rural counties around it, which happen to also be predominantly white. And I also think that even if it weren't a VRA district, it should be a competitive district. It should be a district that we stay up until 3 o'clock in the morning waiting to see what the vote count is because it's close. And the fact that it's not is purely because of how the lines are drawn. And they are drawn in such a way as to dilute Black voter power.
Thank you. Thank you. I will answer. One of the questions was if we're going to use the same link for the nights next week, and we are. So please come back to see us next week. It will be the same link. And another question was about who Evan represents, and he's the executive director of Alabama Forward, and Kathy Jones is the president of the League of Women Voters in Alabama. The other question we have is if Webster says, this is from Lisa Ward, if person of color is anyone not white, how come Asian, Native Americans, Latinos, et cetera, are not included in the 27% we call minorities in Alabama? I would think including them would increase our percentage in our argument of justification. Tish or Evan, either one of you want to take that one on?
From a statistical analysis perspective, I would say that the way in which other racial or ethnic minorities are spread throughout the population is such that the way that you calculate effectiveness is not helped by including other along with Black when you're talking about people of color. I would also suggest that legally there are a lot of places where we don't have definitive answers. For example, I imagine that in some jurisdictions, this redistricting cycle, the question has been asked, how do we count folks who on the census identified as biracial? Do you count them as Black or do you count them as white? Did you ask by biracial, what is the composition of your non-singular racial status? And I know that differing minds did different things. So in Alabama, I think the biracial percentage is something like 3 or 4%. And I'm no statistician, but I remember that 3 or 4% is within a range of error. So if you count biracial, you are adding a percentage that may mess up your error rate. Does that make sense, engineer, who I am speaking to? Okay. And so I hope that answers Lisa's question. I am not entirely sure that that is the full legal answer as to why we don't compound the assessment of minority racial groups.
Thank you. And Evan, you have anything to add there?
Just the unique factoid that one of the reasons we didn't lose one of our congressional seats was because of the population growth here in the state that was in large part for the first, at least for the first part of the last 10 years, driven by folks that were born, outside of the country, particularly Mexico, Central America. Many of the very people that the state was suing not to count. Right. So, just in the broader discussion of racial equity and just something to keep in mind.
Okay, I really appreciate that. Hey, thank you, everyone. And thank you for all you're doing. I know all of you have been working for a long time, working on this, helping educate people and getting people to be interested and engaged in their government. I do hope that this, what we're doing is helping to inform the citizens on the redistricting process. And I do hope you'll come back on Monday, 1 November, for our second part, where we will discuss the congressional map that has been released, the ramifications of that map, and what it means to the citizens of Alabama. And also go over what's happening in the legislature. Everybody, thank you very much, and I hope everybody has a good evening.